Oh god, my mic was off already. Hey guys, how y'all doing today? So, this is my first readings along session. I am a bit nervous. That's a long. So, today we'll be reading The War of the Worlds from H.G. Wells. Let's see if we can get how long we can last tonight. We can try it for 1 or 2 hours. So, I have my milk. Are we all comfy? Get you behind here, my jacket on. There we go. Okay. Okay, so if I read too fast, when I repeat something, let me know. I can go back. All right. So, as I said, this is H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds, Book One: Becoming of the Martians. One, the the eve of the war. No one would have believed in the last years of the 19th century that this world was being watched keenly and closely by intelligence greater than man's and yet as mortal as his own. That as men busied themselves about their various concerns, they were scrutinized and studied, perhaps almost as narrowly as a man with a microscope might scrutinize the transient creatures that swim and multiply in a drop of water. With infinite complacency, men went to and fro over this globe about their little affairs, serene in their assurance of their empire over matter. It is possible that the Infusoria under the microscope do the same. No one gave a thought to the outer world of space as sources of human danger, or thought of them only to dismiss the idea of life upon them as impossible or improbable. It is curious to recall some of the mental habits of those departed days. At At most terrestrial men fancied there might be other men upon Mars, perhaps inferior to themselves, and ready to welcome a missionary enterprise. Yet across the gulf of space, minds that are to our minds as ours are to those of the beasts that perish. Intellects vast and cool and unsympathetic regarded this earth with envious eyes, and slowly and surely drew their plans against us. And early in the 20th century came the Great Disillusionment. The planet Mars, I scarcely need to remind the reader, revolves around about the sun at a mean distance of 140 million miles, and the light and heat it receives from the sun is barely half of that received by this world. It must be the nebular hypothesis has any truth, older than our world, and long before this earth ceased to be molten. Life upon its surface must have begun its course. The fact that it is scarcely one really? I'm blocking me. Okay, lovely. But I can't block it. Where was I? Ah, here we go. The fact that it is scarcely 1/7 of the volume of the Earth must have accelerated its cooling to the temperature at which life could begin. It has air and water and all that is necessary for the support of animated existence. Yet so vain is man, and so blinded by his vanity, that no writer up to the very end of the 19th century expressed any idea that intelligent life might have developed there far, or indeed at all beyond its earthly level. Nor was it generally understood that since Mars is older than our Earth, with scarcely a quarter of the superficial area and remoter from the Sun, necessarily follows that it is not only more distant from time's beginning, but nearer its end. The secular cooling that must someday overtake our planet has already gone far indeed with our neighbor. Its physical condition is still largely a mystery. But we know now that even in its equatorial region, the midday temperature barely approaches that of our coldest winter. Its air is much more attenuated than ours. Its oceans shrunk until they cover but a third of its surface. As its slow and seasons change, huge snowcaps gather and melt about either pole and periodically inundate its temperature zones. That last stage of exhaustion, which to us is still incredibly remote, has become a present day problem for the inhabitants of Mars. The immediate pressure of necessity has brightened their intellects, enlarged their powers, and hardened their hearts. In looking across space with instruments and intelligences such as we have scarcely dreamed of, they see, in its nearest distance, only 35 millions of miles sunward of them, a morning star of hope, our own warmer planet, green with vegetation and gray with water, with a cloudy atmosphere eloquent of fertility, with glimpses through its drifting cloud, wisps of broad stretches of populous country and marrow, navy crowded seas. And we men, the creatures who inhabit this earth, must be to them at least as alien and lowly as are the monkeys and lemurs to us. The intellectual side of man already admits that life is an incessant struggle for existence. And it would seem that this too is the belief of the minds upon Mars. Their world is far gone in its cooling, and this world is still crowded with life, or crowded only with what they regard as inferior animals. To carry wayward sun, to carry warfare sunward is, indeed, the only escape from the destruction that generation after generation creeps upon them. And before we judge of them too harshly, we must remember what ruthless and utter destruction our own species has wrought, not only upon animals, such as the vanished bison and the dodo, but upon its inferior races, the Tasmanians. In spite of their human likeness, were entirely swept out of existence in a war of extermination waged by European immigrants in the space of 50 years. Are we such apostles of mercy as to complain if the Martians warred in the same spirit? The Martians seem to have calculated their descent with amazing subtlety. The mathematical learning is evidently far in excess of ours, and to have carried out their preparation with a well-nigh perfect unanimity. Had our instruments permitted it, we might have seen the gathering trouble far back in the 19th century. Men like Schiaparelli watched the red planet. It is odd, by the by, that for countless centuries Mars has been the star of war, but failed to interpret the fluctuating appearances of the markings they mapped so well. All that time, the Martians must have been getting ready. Let me get a nice little sip of milk. During the opposition of 1894, a great light was seen on the illuminated part of the disk, first at the Lake Observatory, and then by Perrotin of Nice, and then by other observers. English readers heard of its first in the issue of Nature, dated August 2. I am inclined to think that this blaze may have been the casting of a huge gun. The vast pit sunk into their planet, from which their shots were fired at us. Peculiar markings, as yet unexplained, were seen near the site of that outbreak during the next two oppositions. The storm burst upon us 6 years ago now. As Mars approached opposition, the valve of Java lit the wires of astronomical exchange, palpitating within the amazing intelligence of a huge outbreak of incandescent gas upon the planet. It had occurred towards midnight of the 12th, when a spectroscope to which he had at once resorted indicated a mass of flaming gas, chiefly hydrogen, moving with enormous velocity towards this Earth. This jet of fire had become invisible about 12:15. He compared it to a colossal puff of flame, suddenly and violently squirted out of the planet, as flaming gases rushed out of a gun. A singularly appropriate phrase it proved. Yet the next day there was nothing of this in the papers except a little note in the Daily Telegraph, and the world went in ignorance of one of the gravest dangers that ever threatened the human race. I might not have heard of the eruption. At all had I not met Ogilvy, the well-known astronomer, at Ottershaw. He was immensely excited at the news, and in the excess of his feelings invited me up to take a turn with him that night in the scrutiny of the red planet. In spite of all that has happened since, I still remember that vigil very distinctly. The blackened sunny observatory, the shadowed lantern throwing a feeble glow upon the floor in the corner. The steady ticking of the clockwork of the telescope, the little slit in the roof, an oblong profundity with a starry street across it. Ogilvy moved about, invisible but audible. Looking through the telescope, one saw a circle of deep blue, and the little round planet swimming in the field. It seemed such a little thing, so bright and small and still, faintly marked with transverse stripes, and slightly flattened from the perfect round. But so little it was, so silvery warm, a pin's head of light! It was as if it quivered, but really this was the telescope vibrating with the activity of the clockwork that kept the planet in view. As I watched, the planet seemed to grow larger and smaller and to advance and recede. But that was simply that my eye was tired. 40 millions of miles of void. Few people realize the immensity of vacancy in which the dust of the material universe swims. Near in the field, I remember were three faint points of light, three telescopic stars infinitely remote, and all around it was an unfathomable darkness of empty space. Ah, yes, the good old void. How I love it. You know that blackness looks on a frosty starlight night. The telescope, it seems far profounder. An invisibility to me because it was so remote and small. Oh, my face, great. Flying swiftly and steadily towards me across the incredible distance, drawing nearer every minute by so many thousands of miles, came the thing they were sending us, the thing that was to bring so much struggle and calamity and death to the earth. I never dreamt of it then as I watched. No one on Earth dreamt of that unnerving missile. That night, too, there was another jetting out of gas from a distant planet. I saw it. A reddish flash at the edge, the slightest projection of the outline just as the chronometer struck midnight. And at that, I told Ogilvy, and he took my place. The night was warm, and I was thirsty. And I went stretching my legs clumsily and feeling my way in the darkness. The little table where the siphon stood, while Ogilvy exclaimed at the streaming of gas that came out towards us. That night, another invisible missile started on its way to the Earth from Mars. Just a second or so under 24 hours after the first one. I remember how I sat on the table there in the blackness, the patches of green and crimson swimming before my eyes. I wish I had a light to smoke by, little suspecting the meaning of the minute gleam I had seen in all that it would presently bring me. Ogilvy watched till 1, and then gave it up, and we lit the lantern and walked over to his house. Down below in the darkness were Ottershaw and Kirsty and all their hundreds of people sleeping in peace. He was full of speculation that night about the condition of Mars, and scoffed at the vulgar idea of its having inhabitants who were signaling us. His idea was that meteorites might be falling in a heaven shower upon the planet, or that a huge volcanic explosion was in progress. He pointed out to me how unlikely it was that organic evolution had taken the same direction in the two adjacent planets. The chances against anything man-like on Mars are a million to one, he said. Hundreds of observers saw the flame that night, and the night after about midnight, and again the night after, and so for 10 nights, a flame each night. Why the shot ceased after the 10th, no one on Earth has attempted to explain. And maybe the gases of the firing caused the Martians inconvenience. Dense clouds of smoke or dust, visible through a powerful telescope on Earth as little gray, fluctuating patches, spread through the clearness of the planet's atmosphere and obscured its more familiar features. Even the daily papers woke up to the disturbances at last, and popular notes appeared here, there, and everywhere concerning the volcanoes upon Mars. The serial-comic periodical Punch, I remember, made a happy use of it in the political cartoon, and unsuspected those missiles the Martians had fired at us due earthward, rushing out at a pace of many miles a second throughout the empty gulf of space, hour by hour and day by day, nearer and nearer. It seems to me now almost incredibly wonderful that, with that such fate hanging over us, men could go about their petty concerns as they did. I remember how jubilant Markham was at securing a new photograph of the planet for the illustrated paper he edited in those days. People in these latter times scarcely realize the abundance and enterprise of our 19th century papers. For my own part, I was much occupied in learning to ride the bicycle, and busy upon a series of papers discussing the probable developments of moral ideas as civilization progressed. One night, the first missile that could scarcely have been 10 million miles away, I went for a walk with my wife. It was starlight, and I explained the signs of the zodiac to her, and pointed out Mars, a bright dot of light creeping zenithward, towards which so many telescopes were pointed. It was a warm night. Coming home, a party of excursionists from Jersey or Isleworth passed us singing and playing music. There were lights in the upper windows of the houses as the people went to bed. From the railway station in the distance came the sound of shunting trains, ringing and rumbling, softened almost into melody by the distance. My wife pointed out to me the brightness of the red, green, and yellow signals hanging in a framework against the sky. It seemed so safe and tranquil. 2. The Falling Star. Then came the night of the first falling star. It was seen early in the morning, rushing over Winchester eastward, a line of flame high in the atmosphere. Hundreds must have seen it and taken it for an ordinary falling star. Alvin described it as leaving a greenish streak behind it that glowed for some seconds. Denning, our greatest authority on meteorites, stated that the height of its first appearance was about 90 or 100 miles. It seemed to him that it fell to Earth about 100 miles east of him. I was at my home at that hour and writing in my study, and although my French windows faced towards Ottershaw and the blind was up, for I loved in those days to look up at the night sky, I saw nothing of it. Yet the strangest of all things that even came to Earth from outer space must have fallen while I was sitting there, visibly to me had I only looked up at the past. Some of those who saw its flight say it traveled with a hissing sound. I myself heard nothing of that. Many people in Berkshire, Shirley, and Middlesex must have seen the fall of it, and at most have felt that another meteorite had descended. No one seems to have troubled to look for the falling mass that night. But very early in the morning, poor Ogilvy, who had seen the shooting star, and who was persuaded that a meteorite lay somewhere on the common between Horsham, Ottershaw, and Woking, rose early with the idea of finding it. Find it he did, soon after dawn, and not far from the sand pits. An enormous hole had been made by the impact of the projectile, and the sand and gravel had been flung violently in every direction over the heath, forming heaps visible a mile and a half away. The heather was on fire eastward. The thin blue smoke was against the dawn. The thing itself lay almost entirely buried in sand. Amidst the scattered splinters of a fir tree, and shivered to fragments in its descent. The uncovered part had the appearance of a huge cylinder, caked over as its outline softened by a thick, scaly, dun-colored incrustation. It had a diameter of about 30 yards. He approached the mass, surprised at the size and more so at the shape. Since most meteorites are rounded more or less completely, it was, however, still so hot from its flight, through air as to forbid his near approach. A stirring noise within its cylinder had ascribed to the unequal cooling of its surface. For at that time it had not occupied to him that it might be hollow. He remained standing at the edge of the pit that the thing had made for itself, staring at its strange appearance, astonished chiefly at its unusual shape and color, and dimly perceiving even then some evidence of design in its arrival. The early morning was wonderfully still, and the sun, just clearing the pine tree towards Weybridge, was already warm. He did not remember hearing any birds that morning. There was certainly no breeze stirring, and the only sounds were the faint movements from within the century cylinder. He was all alone on the common. Then suddenly he noticed with a start that some of the great clinker, the edgy incrustation that covered the meteorite, was falling off the circular edge of the end. It was dropping off in flakes and raining down upon the sand. A large piece suddenly came off and fell with a sharp noise that brought his heart into his mouth. For a minute he scarcely realized what this meant, and although the heat was excessive, he clambered down into the pit close to the boat to see the thing more clearly. He fancied even that the cooling of the body might account for this. But what disturbed that idea was the fact that the ash was falling only from the end of the cylinder, and that he perceived that, very slowly, the circular top of the cylinder was rotating on its body. It was such a gradual movement that he discovered it only through noticing that a black mark had been near him 5 minutes ago was now at the other side of the circumference. Even then, he scarcely understood what it indicated, until he heard a muffling grating sound and saw the black mark jerk forward an inch or so. Then the thing came upon him in a flash. The cylinder was artificial, hollow, with the end that screwed out. Something within the cylinder was unscrewing the top. Good heavens, said Ugly. There's a man in it! Man in it! Half frozen to death, trying to escape! Well, that. Oh, if only it was man. At once, the quick mental leap. He linked that thing with the fetch upon Mars. He thought of the confined creature that was so dreadful to him that he forgot the heat and went forth to the cylinder to help turn. But luckily, the dull radiation arrested him before he could burn his hand on the still glowing metal. At that, he stood irresolute for a moment, then turned, scrambled out of the pit, and set off running wildly into Woking. The time that must have been somewhere about 6 o'clock. He met a wagoner and tried to make him understand. But the tale he told and his appearance were so wild that Tad had fallen off in the pit, that the man simply drove on. He was equally unsuccessful with the potman, who was just unlocking the doors of the public house by Horseshoe Bridge. The fellow thought he was a lunatic at large and made an unsuccessful attempt to shut him into the tap room. That sobered him a little, and when he saw Henderson, the London journalist, in his garden, he called over the paling and made himself understood. Henderson, he called. You saw the shooting star last night? Well, it's out on Horseshoe Common now. Good Lord! Fallen meteorite, that's good! But it's something more than a meteorite. It's a cylinder. An artificial cylinder, man! And there's something inside. Henderson stood up with his spade in his hand. What's that? He said. He was deaf in one ear. Ogilvy told him all that he had seen. Henderson was a minute or so talking, taking it in. Then he dropped his spade, snatched up his jacket, and came on into the road. The two men hurried back at once to the common, and found the cylinder still lying in the same position. But now the sounds inside had ceased. The thin circle of bright metal showed between the top and the bottom of the cylinder. It was either entering or escaping at the rim with a thin sizzling sound. They listened, rapped on the scaly burnt metal with a stick, and meeting with no response. They both concluded that the man or men inside must be insensible or dead. Of course, the two were quite unable to do anything. They shouted consolation and promises, and went off back to the town again to get help. One can imagine them, covered with sand, excited and disordered, running up the little street in the bright sunlight just as the shop folks were taking down their shutters and people were opening their bedroom windows. Henderson went into the railway station at once in order to telegraph the news to London. The newspaper articles had prepared men's minds for reception of the idea. By 8 o'clock, a number of boys and unemployed men had already started for the Commons to see the dead men from Mars. That was the form of the story it took. I heard it first from my newspaper boy about 8:45 when I went to get my daily Chronicle. I was naturally startled and lost no time in going out and across the Ottershaw Bridge to the sandpits. 3. On Horseshoe Common. I found a little crowd of perhaps 20 people surrounding the huge hole in which the cylinder lay. I have already described the appearance of that colossal bulk, embedded in the ground. The turf and gravel about it seemed charred as if by a sudden explosion. No doubt its impact had caused a flash of fire. Henderson and Ogilvy were not there. I think they perceived that nothing was to be done for the present, and had gone away to breakfast at Henderson's house. There were 4 or 5 boys sitting on the edge of the pit, with their feet dangling and amusing themselves until I stopped them by throwing something at the giant mass. After I had spoken to them about it, they began playing at touch, and in out of the group of bystanders. Among these were a couple of cyclists, a jobbing gardener I employed sometimes, a girl carrying a baby, Greg the butcher and his little boy, the 2 or 3 loafers and golf caddies who were accustomed to hang about the railway station. They were very little talking. Few of the common people in England had anything but the vaguest astronomical ideas in those days. Most of them were staring quietly at the big table like the end of a cylinder, which was still as Ogilvy and Henderson had left it. I fancied the popular expectations of a heap of charred corpses were disappointed in this inanimate bulk. Some went away while I was there, and other people came. I clambered into the pit and fancied I heard a faint movement under my feet. The top had certainly ceased to rotate. It was only when I got thus close to it that the strangeness of its object was at all evident to me. At the first glance, it was really no more exciting than an overturned carriage or a tree blown across the road. Not so much so, indeed. It looked like a rusty gas float. It required a certain amount of scientific education to perceive that the great scale of the thing was no common oxide, that the yellowish-white metal that gleamed in the crack between the lid and the cylinder an unfamiliar hue. Extraterrestrial had no meaning for most of the onlookers. At that time, it was quite clear in my own mind that the thing had come from the planet Mars, but I judged it improbable that it contained any living creature. I thought the unscrewing might be automatic. In spite of Ogilvy, I still believed that there were men in Mars. My mind ran fancifully on the possibility that it containing manuscript, and the difficulty in translation that might arise. Whether we should find coins or models in it, and so forth. Yet it was a little too large for assurance on this idea. I felt an impatience to see it open. About 11, as nothing seemed happening, I walked back full of such thoughts to my home in Maybury, but I found it difficult to get work upon my appetite investigation. In the afternoon, the appearance of the Common had altered very much. The early editions of the evening papers had started London with enormous headlines. A message received from Mars! Remarkable story from working, and so forth. In addition, Ogilvy's wire to the astronomical exchange had roused every observatory in the three kingdoms. There were half a dozen flies or more from the working station standing in the row by the sandpits. A basket chased from the Shobham in a rather lordly carriage. Besides that, there was quite a heap of bicycles. In addition, a large number of people must have walked, in spite of the heat of the day, from Woking and Chertsey, so that there was altogether quite a considerable crowd, one or two gaily dressed ladies among the others. It was glaringly hot, and a cloud in the sky nor a breath of wind. The only shadow was that of the few scattered pine trees. The burning heather had been extinguished, but the level ground towards Ottershaw was blackened as far as one could see, and still giving off vertical streamers of smoke. An enterprising sweetstuff dealer in the Cheltenham Road had sent up his son with a barrel load of green apples and ginger beer. Going to the edge of the pit, I found it occupied by a group of about half a dozen men. Henderson, Ogilvy, and a tall, fair-haired man that I afterwards learned was Stent, the astronomer royal, with several workmen wielding spades and pickaxes. Stent was giving directions in a clear, high-pitched voice. He was standing on the cylinder, which was now evidently much cooler. His face was crimson and streaming with perspiration, and something seemed to have irritated him. A large portion of the cylinder had been uncovered, though its lowly end was still embedded. As soon as Ogilvy had saw me among the staring crowd of the edge of the pit, he called to me to come down, and asked me if I would mind going over to see Lord Hilton, the lord of the manor. The growing crowd, he said, was becoming a serious impediment to the excavations, especially the boys. They wanted a light railing put up and help to keep the people back. He told me that a faint stirring was occasionally still audible within the case, but that the workmen had failed to unscrew the top, and afforded no grip to them. The case appeared to be enormously thick. It was possible that the faint sounds we heard represented a noisy tumult in the interior. I was very glad to do as he asked, and to become one of the privileged spectators within the contemplated enclosure. I failed to find Lord Hilton at his house, but I was told he was expected from London by the 6 o'clock train from Waterloo, and as it was then about 5:15, I went home, had some tea, and walked out to the station to waylay him. 4. The cylinder opens. I will be right back. Let me get some water. I am getting a bit thirsty. I think this actually works for once. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. Milk wasn't cutting it for King my thirstiness. Alright, so where were we? Really? Huh. Uh, Chapter 4. The cylinder opens. When I returned to the common and the sun was setting, scattered groups were hurrying from the direction of Woking, and one or two persons were returning. The crowd about the pit had increased. It stood out black against the lemon yellow of the sky. A couple of hundred people, perhaps. There were raised voices, and some sort of struggle appeared to be going on about the pit. Strange imaginings passed through my mind. The junior I heard Stern's voice. Keep back! Keep back! A boy came running towards me. It's a movement, he said to me as he passed. A screwing and a screwing out. I don't like it. I'm on my way. I went onto the crowd. There were really, I should think, 200 or 300 people elbowing and jostling one another. The one or two ladies there being by no means the least active. He's fallen the pit, cried someone. Keep back, said several. The crowd swayed a little, and I elbowed my way through. Everyone seemed really excited. I heard a peculiar humming sound from the pit. I say, said Ogilvy. Help keep these idiots back. We don't know what's in the confounded thing, you know. I saw a young man, a shop assistant in Woking, I believe he was, sitting on the cylinder and trying to scramble out of its hole again. The crowd had pushed him in. The end of the cylinder was being screwed out from within. Nearly 2 feet of shining screw projected. Somebody blundered against me and narrowly missed being pitched into the top of the screw. I turned, and as I did, so the screw must have come out. The lid of the cylinder fell upon the gravel with a ringing concussion. I stood my elbow into the person behind me and turned my head towards the thing again. For a moment, that circular cavity seemed perfectly black. I had a sunset in my eyes. I think everyone expected to see a man emerge, possibly something a little unlike a terrestrial man, but in all essentials a man. I know I did, but looking, I presently saw something stirring within the shadow. Grayish, billowing movements, one above another, and then two luminous discs like eyes. Then something resembling a little gray snake, with the thickness of a walking stick, coiled up out of the writhing metal and wriggled in the air towards me, and then another. A sudden chill came over me. There was a loud shriek from a woman behind. I half turned, keeping my eye fixed upon the cylinder still, from which other tentacles were now projecting, and began pushing my way back from the edge of the pit. I saw astonishment giving place to horror on the faces of the people about me. I heard inarticulate exclamations on all sides. There was a general movement backwards. I saw the shopman struggling still on the edge of the pit. I found myself alone, and saw the people on the other side of the pit running off, Stent among them. He looked again at the cylinder. An ungovernable terror gripped me. I stood petrified and staring. A big grayish. Huh? Huh. A big grayish rounded bulk, the size of perhaps of a bear, was rising slowly and painfully out of the cylinder. As it bulged up and caught the light, it glistened like wet leather. Two large dark colored eyes were regarding me steadfastly. The mask that framed them, the head of the thing, was rounded and had, one might say, a face. There was a mouth under the eyes, the lipless brim of which quivered and paid and patted and dropped saliva. The whole creature heaved and pulsated convulsively. A long tentacular appendage gripped the edge of the cylinder, another swayed in the air. Those who had never seen a living Martian can scarcely imagine the strange horror of his appearance. The peculiar V-shaped mouth, with its pointed upper lip, the absence of brow ridges, the absence of a chin beneath the wedge-like lower lip, the incessant quivering of this mouth, the gorgon groups of tentacles, the tumultuous breathing of the lungs in a strange atmosphere, the evident heaviness and painfulness of movement due to the greater gravitational energy of the Earth. Above all, the extraterrestrial intensity of the immense eyes were at once vital, intense, inhuman, vivid, and monstrous. There was something fungoid in the oily brown skin, something in the clumsily deliberating of the tedious movements, unspeakably nasty. Even at this first encounter, this first glimpse, I was overcome with disgust and dread. Suddenly, the monster vanished. It toppled over the brim of the cylinder and fallen into the pit. With a thud like the fall of a great mass of leather, I heard it give a peculiar thick cry, and forthwith another of these creatures appeared darkly in the deep shadow of the aperture. I turned and, running madly, made for the first group of trees, perhaps 100 yards away, but I ran slantingly and stumbled, for I could not avert my face from these things. There, among some young pine trees and furze bushes, I stopped, panting, and waited further developments. The common round of the sandpits were dotted with people, standing like myself in a half-fascinated terror, staring at these creatures, or rather at the heaped gravel at the edge of the pit in which they lay. And then, with a renewed horror, I saw a round, black object bobbing up and down on the edge of the pit. It was the head of the shaman who had fallen in, but showing a little black object against the hot western sun. Now, he got his shoulder indeed up, and again he seemed to slip back, until only his head was visible. Suddenly he vanished, and I could have fancied a faint shriek had reached me. I had a momentary impulse to go back and help him, that my fears overruled. Everything was then quite invisible, hidden by the deep pit and the heap of sand that the fall of the cylinder had made. Anyone coming from the road from Cheltenham or Woking would have been amazed at the sight. A dwindling multitude of perhaps 100 people or more standing in a great irregular circle, in ditches, behind bushes, behind gates and hedges, saying little to one another in short, excited shouts, and staring at hard at a few heaps of sand. The barrel of the ginger beer stood, a queer derelict, back against the burning sky, and in the sand pits with a row of deserted vehicles with their horses feeding out of nosebags or pawing the ground. 5. The heat ray. After the glimpse I had of the Martians emerging from the cylinder in which they had come to the Earth from their planet, a kind of fascination paralyzed with my actions. I had remained standing knee deep in the heather, staring at the mouth that hid them, on that battleground of fear and curiosity. I did not dare to go back towards the pit, but I felt passionately longing to peer into it. I began walking, therefore, in a big curve, seeking some point of vantage, and continually looking at the sand heap that hid these newcomers to our Earth. Once a leash of thin black whips, like the arms of an octopus. Ah, yes. You gotta love the other beings of aliens. I love it. Flashed across the sunset and was immediately withdrawn. And afterwards, a thin rod rose up, joint by joint, bringing at its apex a circular disc that spun with a wobbling motion. What could be going on there? Most of the spectators had gathered in one or two groups. One a little crowd towards Woking, the other a knot of people in the direction of Chobham. Evidently, they shared my mental conflict. There were few near me. One man I approached. He was, I perceived, a neighbor of mine, but I did not know his name, and accosted. There was scarcely a time for articulate conversation. What ugly brutes, he said. Good God, what ugly brutes! He repeated this over and over again. Do you see a man in the pit? I said, but he made no answer to that. We became silent and stood watching for a time side by side, deriving, I fancy, a certain comfort in one another's company. And I shifted my position to a little knoll that gave me the advantage of a yard, or more of elevation when I looked for him. Suddenly he was walking towards Woking. The sunset faded to twilight before anything further happened. The crowd far away on the left, towards Woking, seemed to grow. I heard now a faint murmur from it. The little knot of people towards Shobham dispersed. There was scarcely an intimation of movement from the pit. It was this, as much as anything, that gave people courage, and I suppose the new arrivals from Woking also helped to restore confidence. At any rate, as the dusk came up on a slow, intermittent movement upon the sandpits began. A movement that seemed to gather force as the stillness of the evening about the cylinder remained unbroken. Vertical black figures in twos or threes would advance, stop, watch, and advance again, running out as they did so in a thin irregular crescent that promised to enclose the pit in an attunement horns. I, too, on the side began to move towards the pit. Then I saw some cabmen and others had walked slowly to the sandpits, and heard the clatter of hoofs and the grind of wheels. I saw a lad turning off of the barrel of apples, and then, within 30 yards of the pit, advancing from the direction of Horshall, I noted a little black knot of men, the foremost of whom was waving a white flag. This was a deputation. There had been a hasty consultation, and since the Martians were evidently, in spite of their repulsive forms, intelligent creatures, it had been resolved to show them by approaching them with signals that we too were intelligent. Flutter, flutter went the flag, first to the right, then to the left. It was too far for me to recognize anyone there, But afterwards, I learned that Ogilvy, Stent, and Henderson, with others in this attempt at communication. This little group had in its advance dragged inward, so to speak, the circumference of the now almost complete circle of people. A number of dim black figures followed in discreet distances. Suddenly there was a flash of light, and a quantity of luminescent greenish smoke came out of the pit, in three distinct puffs, which drove up one after another straight into the still air. This smoke, or flame perhaps would be the better word for it, was so bright that the deep blue sky overhead and the hazy stretches of brown coming towards Chertsey, set with black pine trees, seemed to darken abruptly as these puffs arose, and to remain the darker after their dispersal. At the same time, a faint hissing sound became audible. Beyond the pit stood the little wedge of people with a white flag at its apex, arrested by this phenomena. The little knot of the small vertical black shapes upon the black ground. As the green smoke arose, their faces flashed a pallid green. It faded again as it vanished. And slowly the hissing passed into a humming into a long, loud, droning noise. Slowly a humped shape rose out of the pit, and the ghost of a beam of light seemed to flicker out from it. Forthwith flashes of actual flame, a bright glare leaping from one to another, spraying the scattered group of men. It was as if some invisible jet impinged upon them and flashed into white flame. It was as if each man were suddenly and momentarily turned to fire. Then, by the light of their own destruction, I saw them stagger and falling, and their supporters turning to run. I stood staring, not as yet realizing that this was death leaping from man to man, in that little crowd. All I felt was that it was something very strange. An almost noiseless and blinding flash of light, and a man fell headlong and lay still. And as the unseen shaft of the heat passed over them, pine trees burst into fire, and everyday furze bush became with one dull and flooded a mass of flames. And far away towards Knapp Hill, I saw the flashes of trees and hedges and wooden buildings suddenly sit alight. It was sweeping round swiftly and steadily. This flaming death, this invisible and inevitable sword of heat. I perceived it coming towards me by the flashing brushes it touched. I was too astounded and stupefied to stir. I heard the crackle of fire in the sandpit and the sudden squeal of a horse that was suddenly stilled. Then it was as if an invisible yet intensely heated finger were drawn upon through the heather between me and the Martians. And all along a curving line beyond the sandpits, the dark ground smoked and crackled. Something fell with a crash far away to the left, where the road from Woking Station opens out on the common. Forthwith the hissing and humming ceased, and the black dome-like object sank slowly out of sight into the pit. All this had happened with such swiftness that I had stood motionless, dumbfounded and dazzled by the flashes of light. Had that death swept through a full circle, it must inevitably have slain me in my surprise. But it passed and spared me, and left the night about me suddenly dark and unfamiliar. The undulating common seemed now dark about to blackness, except where its roadways lay gray and pale under the deep blue sky of the early night. It was dark and suddenly void of men. Overhead the stars were mustering, and in the west the sky was still a pale, bright, almost greenish blue. The tops of the pine trees and the roofs of Portia came out sharp and black against the western afterglow. The Martians and their planets were also either invisible, save that thin mass upon which their restless mirror wobbled. Patches of brush and isolated trees here and there smoked and glowed still, and the houses towards Woking station were sending up spires of flame into the stillness of the evening air. Nothing was changed save for that and a terrible astonishment. The little group of black specks with the flag of white had been swept out of existence. And the stillness of the evening, so it seemed to me, had scarcely been broken. It came to me that I was upon this dark common, helpless, unprotected, and alone. Suddenly, like a thing falling upon me from without came fear. With an effort, I turned and began a stumbling run from the heather. The fear I felt was no rational fear, but a panic terror not only of the Martians, but of the dusk and stillness all about me. Such an extraordinary effect in unmanning me it had that I had reps ran weeping silently as a child might do. Once I had turned, I did not dare to look back. Hey Ezekiel, how you doing today? Had a good day so far? We are currently on chapter 4, was it? We're currently on chapter 5. Ah, there you go. Oof. Well, let's sit back and relax as we continue reading our book of War of the Worlds. Here we go. Have a nice cup of apple cider and a warm blanket. I love I bought my damn phone by Kindle. I remember I felt an extraordinary persuasion that I was being played with. That presently, when I was upon the very verge of safety, how did it? Camera. Work? Yeah, work. Yep. I'm quite comfy and cozy. I will. When I was upon the very verge of safety, with mysterious death as swift as the passage of light, will leap after me from the pit of the cylinder and strike me down. 6. The heat ray in the Chobam Road. It is still a matter of wonder how the Martians are able to slay men so swiftly and so silently. Many think that in some way they are able to generate an intense heat in a chamber of practically absolute non-conductivity. This intense heat they project in a parallel beam against any object they chose, by means of a polished parabolic mirror of unknown composition. Much of that parabolic mirror of a lighthouse projects a beam of light, but no one has absolutely proved these details. However, it is done. It is certain that a beam of heat in the essence of the matter, heat and invisible, instead of visible light. Whatever is combustible flashes into flame as it touches. Lead runs of water. It softens iron, cracks and melts glass. And when it fell upon water, it continually and then explodes into steam. That night, nearly 40 people lay under the starlight about the pit. Shouted and distorted beyond recognition. And all night and long, the common from Porto to Maybury were deserted and brightly ablazed. The news of the massacre probably reached Chobham, Woking, and Ottershaw about the same time. In Woking, the shops had closed when the tragedy happened. A number of people, shop people and so forth, attracted by the stories they had heard, were walking over the Horseshoe Bridge and along the road between the hedges that run out at the lights upon the common. You may imagine the young people brushed up for the labors of the day, and making this novelty, as they would have made any novelty, the excuse for walking together and enjoying a trivial flirtation. You may figure to yourself the hum of voices along the road in the gloaming. And yet, of course, few people in Woking even knew that the cylinder had opened. Though poor Henderson had sent a messenger on a bicycle to the post office with a special wire to an evening paper. As these folks came out by twos and threes upon the open, they found little knots of people talking excitedly and peering at the spinning mirror over the sandpits. And the newcomers were, no doubt, soon infected by the excitement of the occasion. Okay, sure. That's wonderful. Oh, wonderful. By 8:30, when the reputation was destroyed, there may have been a crowd of 300 people or more at this place. Besides those who had left the road to approach the Martians nearer. There were 3 policemen, too, one of whom was mounted, doing their best, under instructions from Stein, to keep the people back and deter them from approaching the cylinder. There was some booing from those more thoughtless and excitable souls to whom a crowd is always an occasion for noise and horseplay. Sid and Ogley anticipating some possibilities of a collision. A telegraph from Horsham to the barracks as soon as the Martians emerged, with the help of a company of soldiers to protect these strangers of creatures from violence. After that, they returned to the lad that ill-fated advance. The description of their death, as it were seen by the crowd, tallies very closely with my own impression. The 3 puffs of green smoke, the deep humming note, and the flashes of flame. But that crowd of people had a far narrower escape than mine. Only the fact that a hummock of heathery sand intercepted the lower part of the heat ray saved them. If the elevation of the parabolic mirror had been a few yards higher, none could have lived to tell the tale. They saw the flashes and the men falling and the possibilities of a collision. A telegraph from Horsham to the barracks as soon as the Martians emerged, with the help of a company of soldiers to protect these strange creatures from violence. After that, they had returned, led the ill-fated advance. The description of their death, as was seen by the crowd, tallies very close. Hold on. Oh, I read the wrong thing again. Oh well. They put the bushes was through the twilight. Then, with a whistling note that arose above the joining of the pit, the beam swung close over their heads, lighting the top of the beech trees that lined the road and splitting the bricks, smashing the windows, burning the windows' frames, and bringing down in crumbling ruin a portion of the gable of the house near the corner. In the sudden thud, hiss, and glare of the igniting trees, the panic-stricken crowd seemed to have swayed hesitantly for some movements. Sparks and burning twigs began to fall from the road, and single leaves like pops of flame. Paths and dresses caught fire. Then came a crying from the common. There were shrieks and shouts, and suddenly a mounted policeman came galloping through the confusion with his hands clasped over his head, screaming, "They're coming!" A woman shrieked. And conveniently, everyone was turning and pushing at those behind, in order to clear their way and walking again. They must have bolted as blindly as a flock of sheep. When the road grows narrow and black between the high banks, the crowd jammed, and a desperate struggle occurred. All that crowd did escape. 3 persons at least, 2 women and a little boy, were crushed and trampled there, left to die amid the terror and the darkness. Let me get him my phone. Let's see. Be right back 1 second. Okay, phone, sure, just drop off. Sure. Sure. Now what? Why is it? Hold on. I don't wonder why this. How did it unplug? What the hell? There we go. Yeah, where'd you go, phone? Just unplug yourself. Yeah, background noise. Might as well get some ambience while we're reading our book. Let's see here. But Chapter 7. I reached home. Do I need to put another book on top of the damn thing? Seriously? How much do I freaking need? For my own part, I remember nothing of my flight except the stress of blundering against. Really? Really? Let me get another book. Hold on. Okay, back. How about good enough? Whatever. So, hold on. Let me speed it off. All right, so about that. Oh, Rudy, why is that? For my own part, I reached nothing of my flight except the stress of blundering against trees and stumbling through the heather. All about me gathered the invisible terrors of the Martians, that pitiless sword of heat seemed whirling to and fro. Ah, great. That sounds wonderful. Download Switch, mobile app. I came into the road between the crossroads and Horshell, in a wrong list of crossroads. At last I could go no further. I was exhausted with the violence of my emotion and of my flight, and I staggered and fell by the wayside. Okay, enjoy the lurk. At last I could go no further. I was exhausted with the violence of my emotion and of my flight. I staggered and fell by the wayside. That was near the bridge that crossed the canal by the gasworks. I fell and lay still. I must have remained there for there some time. I sat up, strangely perplexed. For a moment, perhaps, I could not clearly understand how I came there. My chair had fallen from me like a garment. My hat had gone and my collar had burst away from its fastener. A few minutes before, there had only been three real things before me: the immensity of the night and space and nature, my own enfeebleness and anguish, the near approach of death. Now it was as if something turned over, and the point of view altered abruptly. There was no sensible transition from one state of mind to the other. I was immediately the self of every day again, a decent ordinary citizen, the silent common, the impulse of my flight. The starting flames were as if they had been in a dream. I asked myself, had these latter things indeed happened? I could not credit it. I rose and walked unsteadily up the steep incline of the bridge. My mind was blank in wonder. My muscles and nerves seemed drained of their strength. I dare say I had not staggered drunkenly. A head rose over the arch, and the figure of a workman carrying a basket appeared. Beside him ran a little boy. He passed me, wishing me good night. I was minded to speak to him, but did not. I answered his greeting with a meaningless mumble and went on over the bridge. Over the Maybury arched a train, billowing tumble of white, fire and smoke, and a long caterpillar of lighted windows, and flying south, clatter, clatter, clap, rap, and it had gone. A dim group of people talked in the gate of one of the houses in the pretty little row of gabled, that was cut Oriental terrace. It was all so real and so familiar. And then behind me, it was frantic, fantastic. Such things I told myself could not be. Perhaps I am a man of exceptional moods. I do not know how far my experience is common. At times I suffer from the strangest of sense attachment from myself and the world about me. I seem to watch it all from the outside, from somewhere inconceivable remote, out of time, out of space, out of stress and tragedy of it all. And this feeling was very strong upon me that night. Here was another side to my dream. But the trouble was the blank incongruity of the serenity and the swift death flying yonder, not 2 miles away. There was a noise of business from the gasworks, and the electric lamps were all aligned. I stopped at the group of people. "What news from the common?" said I. There were 2 men and a woman at the gate. "Eh?" said one of them in turn. "What news from the common?" I said. "And you've just been there?" asked the man. "People seem fairly silly about the common," said the woman over the gate. "What's it all about?" "Have you heard from the men from Mars?" said I. "The creatures from Mars?" "Quite enough," said the woman over the gate. "Thanks," and all 3 of them laughed. I felt foolish and angry. I tried and found I could not tell them what I had seen. They laughed again at the broken sentence. "You'll hear more yet," I said, and went on to my home. I apologize for my horrible accents. Yeah, horrible accents. "You hear more yet," I said, and went on to my house. I startled my wife at the doorway, so haggard was I. I went to the dining room and sat down, drank some wine, and as soon as I scattered my thoughts sufficiently, I told her the things I had seen. The dinner, which was a cold one, had already been served, and remained neglected on the table while I told my story. "There is one thing," I said, to allay the fears I had aroused. "They are the most sluggish thing I have ever seen crawl. They may keep the pit and kill people who come near them, but they cannot get out of it. But the horror of them!" "Don't dare," said my wife, knitting her brow, putting her hand on mine. "Poor Ogilvy," I said. "To think he may be lying dead there." My wife, at least, did not find my experience incredible. When I saw how deadly white her face was, I ceased abruptly. "They may come here," she said again and again. "Oh, lovely. I apologize for the ad. You know, it switches with ads." I pressed her to take wine and tried to reassure her. "They can scarcely move," I said. I began to comfort her and myself by repeating all that Olive had told me of the possibility of the Martians establishing themselves on the Earth. In particular, I laid stress on the gravitational difficulty. On the surface of the Earth, the force of gravity is 3 times what it is on the surface of Mars. A Martian, therefore, would weigh 3 times more than on Mars. I'll bet his muscular strength would be the same. His own body would be a cup of lead to him, therefore. That indeed was the general opinion. Both the Times and the Daily Telegraph, for instance, insisted on the next morning. We both overlooked, just as I did, 2 obvious modifying influences. Man, reading a book really does take energy out of you. Oof. More tiring than you think. I'm not used to reading aloud. The atmosphere of the Earth, we now know, contains far more oxygen or less argon, whichever one way one likes to put it, than does Mars. The invigorating influences of... No, it's just getting tired of reading. I'm not used to reading out loud. Where was I? Oh, here we go. Okay. The invigorating influence of its oxygen upon the Martians indisputably did much to counterbalance the increased weight of their bodies. And, in the second place, we all overlooked the fact that swift mechanical intelligence as the Martians possessed was quite able to dispense with muscular exertion at a pinch. But I did not consider these points at the time. And so my reasoning was dead against the chances of the invaders. With wine and food, the confidence of my own table, the necessity of reassuring my wife, I grew by insensible degrees courageous and secure. They have done a foolish thing, said I, filling my wine glass. They are dangerous because, no doubt, they are met with terror. Perhaps they expected to find no living things. Certainly no intelligent living things. I shone the pit, said I. If the worst comes to worst, we'll kill them all. The intense excitement of the eve events had no doubt left my perceptive powers in a state of erethism. What the fuck does that mean? Erethism. Excessive sensitivity or rapid reaction to stimulation or a part of a body. A state of abnormal mental excitement or irritation. Huh. I love these old words. Always learning something new. I remember that dinner table with extraordinary vividness, even now. My dear wife's sweet, anxious face peering at me from under the pink lampshade. The white cloth with its silver and glass table furniture. One of those days, even philosophical writers had many little luxuries. The crimson purple wine in my glass were photographically distinct. At the end of it, I sat, tempering nuts with a cigarette, regretting Ogilvy's rashness, and denouncing the short-sighted timidity of the Martians. So some respectable dodo in the Morotians might have lured it into his nest, and discussed the arrival of that ship full of pitiless sailors in want of animal food. You will peck them to death tomorrow, my dear. I did not know it. Without the last civilized dinner I was to eat for very many strange and terrible a day. So, we're going to call it a night. It's been about an hour 33 minutes, and we're now at chapter 8. And I am now getting mentally exhausted from reading this book. So we are now on chapter 8. We will be picking up again about next week. And I thank everyone who's stopping by to listen to some War of the Worlds. Right, guys, I shall catch you all later. Just have a pleasant. Really, Terp? Really? Really? Good gods, man.
Really? We're about to turn in, you wanna press the damn button? Really? Are you happy now? Are you happy, sir? You went to your point about to turn in for the night. Seriously. What am I gonna do with you? What am I gonna do with you, man? Are you happy now, sir? Are you, are you happy now? Yo, you know, what did we do with you? You know it's not easy for me to freaking week with my glasses on. That really was a waste of points. You burned at the end of the stream. You could have burned the damn thing like earlier today. This guy. This guy. I hope you're happy, Turb. I hope you're really happy. Now what's going on? Huh? Okay. Alright, folks, I'm turning in. Thank you so much, sir, for the points. May I have your form with the turn in for the night. Red night, Ezekiel. Good night, sir. We'll see you tomorrow. What am I gonna do with you, man? Night, folks.